They don't want you to see it, but tucked away within Mexico, far from the well-known cultural hotspots, are black towns and tribes that rarely make it into mainstream narratives. These are the stories of Afro-Mexicans, a vibrant yet overlooked community, carrying a legacy of African heritage and strength that's often hidden from view. Afro-Mexicans, or Afro-Mexicanos, as they're called in Spanish, are Mexicans with roots tracing back to sub-Saharan Africa. Their ancestry stems from enslaved Africans who were brought to Mexico during the colonial era, as well as from free African migrants who arrived after independence. Over the centuries, Afro-Mexicans have become a part of Mexico's rich tapestry, intertwining with indigenous, mestizo, and mulatto communities to form a distinct identity that is both African and Mexican. After the Spanish conquest in 1519, a wave of Africans arrived in Mexico, many of them enslaved and forced across the Atlantic. Veracruz became a focal point for this forced migration. By the 1600s, around 200,000 enslaved Africans had been brought to Mexican shores. Yet, as Mexico forged a national identity, the African part of this heritage was often erased, leaving behind a narrative that prioritized Spanish and indigenous roots. For many Afro-Mexicans, the journey has been one of survival and persistence, often fighting invisibility in a nation that, after the Mexican Revolution, largely left out African influences. Mexican authorities and historians shaped an identity that highlighted Spanish and indigenous backgrounds while sidelining African history. Only in 1992 did the Mexican government officially recognize African culture as one of the three main pillars of its heritage, along with Spanish and indigenous influences. So who are Afro-Mexicans today? Despite centuries of historical neglect, these communities endure predominantly in places like Oaxaca, Guerrero, Michoacán, and Veracruz. They maintain traditions, music, and stories that link them to Africa and a collective struggle for survival. Although only 2.4 to 3% of Mexico's population openly claims African ancestry, activists argue the real figure may be higher, hidden by a history of forced assimilation. In 2015, Afro-Mexicans were able, for the first time, to identify as such on a national census. This wasn't just about counting people. It was about reclaiming a part of Mexico's identity that had been neglected. Approximately 2.5 million Mexicans identified as Afro-Mexican, a number that marked only the beginning, according to activists like Benigno Gallardo, who believe that mainstream Mexican culture still doesn't fully acknowledge Afro-Mexican identity.